Good morning. Good morning, Mike. Good morning, Alex. You can hear me, right?
Afternoon. Good
Yes,
morning.
good morning, Halil.
Yes.
Great. I had a 30-second connection problem, but I was able to find the link. Thanks, Mike. Mike, Alex, this is the second day. Welcome, everyone. So I received some good feedback from our colleagues. So yesterday, it was a very good session. And today we will start the second day. As I mentioned yesterday, I'm sure you will have a lot of questions. Please just send your comments, questions. But we will be discussing also with Alex and EdTech team follow-up also sessions. Actually, some of them may require more detailed technical discussion. So we will discuss with the team and come back to you in coming weeks and maybe months. Alex, I don't know if you have anything to add before we start, then I'll turn to Mike to moderate.
No, Halil, I think yesterday went very well. We have a lot of questions. We are going to compile an FAQ for all the questions that were asked and actually send written submissions. And we are all set for today. So I'll hand it over to Mike to kick us off. I think we'll go first with Maria. But Mike, you're now in charge. Over.
I'm not in charge, Alex, but thank you. And I'll hand it over to Maria. We'll give a quick recap of yesterday and a quick preview of today. And then we'll jump right into 4+ fantastic speakers on 4 very relevant topics for TTLs. Maria, over to you.
Thanks a lot, Mike, Halil, and Alex. Good afternoon, good morning, everyone. Thanks to all of those who took part of yesterday's session and are also deciding to join us on this second session of the training on digital learning. As teaching and learning are bidirectional activities, we as the EdTech team benefit enormously from your questions and observations, as they help us build stronger products that respond to TTLs and clients' needs. Yesterday, we had presentations about devices, digital content, LMS, and Image 2.0. I would just like to quickly highlight 2 main ideas that spurred from yesterday's discussion. The first is the importance of not thinking about each of these topics and knowledge packs in isolation, as they are all interlinked. For example, in the approach paper, we have a spider graph that highlights all the interconnections among all of these subtopics and puts the learner at the center of any EdTech intervention. Devices and LMS, for example, need quality content aligned to curriculum to have the potential to be impactful. And monitoring data is key for students and teachers. In times of crisis, investing in no-regret policies, such as enhancing standard data collection on usage of platforms and devices, for example, and hopefully disaggregated by gender as well, might help countries learn and act as needed to avoid dropouts of girls and boys. Also, I would highlight another consideration for quality assurance of content should be not to perpetuate gender stereotypes, especially in the context of COVID-19, and as we know from evidence, the higher risk of dropouts that girls face. Even in the context of hybrid learning or as the students return to school, girls may have to shoulder most household work or spend more time tending to siblings, and this increased workload diminishes their time to study and engage with learning. This leads me to my second point. How can we keep teachers and students engaged in EdTech programs? In fact, any intervention, including those which use technology as a medium to improve learning, can only have the potential to be impactful if they are taken up by its intended targeted population. Behind all of this technical knowledge, which might sometimes appear pretty dense, we have teachers and students that need to be engaged and motivated. The role of teachers, as we know, is rapidly evolving and becoming in many ways more difficult than when learning took place only in person. Education systems are being pushed to quickly reimagine human connection and interactions to facilitate learning. Focusing on honing in the design of a program, taking into account the stakeholders, their motivations, and the ecosystem they are embedded into is key. Some of the highlights of yesterday's discussion for me were the use of incentives and nudges to help actors engage more effectively, for example, in filling data, in using LMS, in using devices, etc. As takeaways from yesterday, we will aim to gather more counterexamples on factors driving successful implementations in the packs, as well as highlighting the areas in which the packs interlink. Today, we have presentations focused on digital assessment, use of technology to improve literacy, teacher skills for remote and blended learning, as well as tutoring and remedial learning. And we are looking forward to hear your thoughts on each of these topics, as we know these are very common and very useful in our operations, and how we can use these comments to make the packs even more useful. So without further ado, let me go back to Mike to return to the moderation. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Maria. Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Halil. Yesterday, we focused on tools, and today we are going to focus on human capabilities, capacity building. And we'll be talking through a series of 4 pretty quick presentations and then 4 ensuing discussions about these topics: digital assessment, about literacy, about teacher skills, and then finally about tutoring and remedial learning. We will be sharing these presentations with you by email during the session. You may have received them now, and through a link on the internet, which will be available shortly. We welcome you contacting us with questions, comments, requests after this, but we also welcome them now. Comment section in the chat box. Hopefully that will be lively. Not only asking questions, but helping to answer questions of your colleagues. Yesterday, we had lots of people jumping in and providing lessons from their own experiences. So without any further talking on my behalf, I'd like to introduce you to Ed Gable. Ed is one of a whole bunch of consultants that the World Bank uses a lot, experts in a variety of ed tech topics. This morning, Ed will be talking about digital assessment. Ed will have 10 minutes. Ed, you'll see my face, which will have a smile on it, but approaching a frown right about the 10-minute mark. Over to you, Ed. Thanks so much.
Oh, excellent. That's excellent, Mike. Thanks very much. Can you guys see what I've got going on here?
We can.
Yes.
Okay. Let's take a look. And now, how does it look for you? Okay. So I am talking about digital assessment.
Ed, last step. Your slideshow.
Okay, I'm using the slide. Oh, yes, gotcha. Use slideshow. Okay. Then I don't get to see what I'm going to try to stay on the clock, Mike, nonetheless. So I'm going to talk about digital assessment and jump right into the digital part. What we see is that the primary advantages of digital assessment in terms of formative assessment, the assessment of for learning, so to speak, is that it replaces huge amounts of bundles of information that come into the teacher. If the teacher gives a paper-based quiz, for example, to 60 students, he might get 60 pieces of paper back that he's got to mark and that he's got to tally and then assess and then do something with. With digital formative assessment, that becomes a one-step process, basically, making formative assessment possible, so that things that become impossible for the most part to implement in real life situations become possible when you add digital tools. Similarly, with summative assessment, the primary drivers, I think, are the ability to get real-time data instantly, the increase in reliability of the scoring because you don't have the human factor, you don't have the transfer of data across from the exam itself to the mark sheet, if you will. The support for distance learning, you cannot have distance learning without the ability to deliver summative assessment, as I see it. And with support for special populations, either marginalized by needs, by geography, summative assessment, digital summative assessment, theoretically enables students to sit exams anywhere, and as we will see in the example of Caribbean Examination Council, anytime. So the digital formative assessment, we're going to ask why, what are the objectives? The first are the same as paper-based formative assessment, to improve learning by incorporating metacognition and drawing on the tradition of assessment for learning started, I think, by Dylan William. We talk more about that in the overall KP, if you will. And to improve instruction, the idea being that teachers have more connection to what students really know. And if you've been in the classroom, you realize that a lot of the time teachers are better able to learn, students are better able to learn from each other because they know what they don't know and where their needs are. This gives teachers, assessment for learning, if you will, gives teachers the ability to find out what is happening with their students and adjust instruction appropriately. So digital formative assessment accomplishes those things, plus it makes formative assessment really possible in the class by increasing the speed and efficiency of the administration of the exam or the formative assessment, whatever kind it is. In remote education situations, it improves the teacher's online presence, which, as we'll note in a case study, is critical to students' continuation with the course, students feeling that they are being well served by the course and that their needs are being met. It also, formative assessment in a digital environment also improves digital skills and comfort with relatives tools on the behalf of teachers and students. And as mentioned, it supports remote learning. Teachers are able to administer formative assessment to achieve presence despite the fact that they're working virtually with students online or at a distance, if you will. So we do have use case scenarios. It's really critical, I think, as we'll see, that the first major step is understanding who, how, what, why, and when the digital formative assessment is going to be used. You need to know who is going to use it, how they're going to use it, and what the outcomes are going to be. That's very, very, very important. What kinds of devices they're going to use, what kinds of connectivity they're going to use. So I'm not going to go through these all. I hope that you have a chance later on as you see the slides. But what we note in the first one is that the teacher is successful because he is able to increase his presence, delivery, his ability to connect to his online class. We note in the second one that in the second example that the Rwandan students working on their group blog are able to take advantage of metacognitive goals that they set for themselves and examine their progress towards those goals using the Padlet app to create a shared portfolio. Similarly, there are use cases for in-person or in-class use of digital formative assessment, including the peer learning work with Google Docs in Nigeria mentioned there, and the use of a Wi-Fi LAN in South Africa to understand by the teacher to understand what students know and do not know. So I want to quickly look at the stages of development of digital formative assessment. As my colleague Federico said yesterday, we have 3 stages. In this case, they are design, deploy, and sustain. Most importantly, in the design phase, I think, is to envision use cases for as mentioned, use cases that tell you who is going to access formative assessment, why they're going to access it, what they're going to do with it, and what the outcomes are going to be, and when, you need to know what connectivity they're going to use. The key factors in terms of the costing and development of digital formative assessment, in my opinion at least, are making sure you have devices and connectivity, then making sure that you have teacher professional development to help the teachers understand what to do with the assessment results and to help them understand what they can do in relation to the curriculum and in relation to catch-up learning, if you will, which I believe my colleague Cristobal is going to talk about. The flexible approach, then they also need, pardon me, they also need a flexible approach to the curriculum to be able to adjust what they're doing to meet the needs of students. So in the deploy phase, we see that most importantly, is the development of digital assets, in this case, question banks, or it could be quizzes, it could be any kinds of assessment that is linked with the curriculum, including an activity such as create a digital portfolio using the Padlet app. The delivery of TPD, teacher professional development at scale, in order to give teachers the ability to use the digital tools, to conduct formative assessment, and to address the results of the assessment. And then the sustain phase includes primarily monitoring, evaluation, and communication. You need to create, as Dylan Williams says, a culture of assessment so that everyone understands that the digital formative assessment is actually accomplishing something that is valuable to their child, parents in particular. Here's a list of digital formative assessment tools, some of which I've mentioned, and there is a longer list available by what used to be the Northwest Education Evaluators Association, NWEA. It's quite a good list and worth checking out, I think. You'll see in this that most of the tools are available for free or as freemium versions. Moving along, summative assessment, the objectives of summative assessment are similar again to the objectives of paper-based summative assessment. However, digital summative assessment also increases the speed and efficiency of summative assessment. It reduces the errors, including the reliability and marking of exams. It supports remote or distance education, and it supports anytime, anywhere assessment. So those are, I think, what you're trying to accomplish by integrating digital summative assessment into your program. There are several examples of COVID-19 instances in which the COVID-19 pandemic has accelerated the use of digital summative assessment. Notably, the two regional examination boards are shifting to digital summative assessment. They were doing this prior to the pandemic, I believe. The West Africa Examination Council, which administers the WAS, is making computer-based assessment available to users basically anywhere. They still sit en masse. It's still the WAS date, as I understand it. Whereas Caribbean Examination Council, CXC, they have 20 exams are going to shift into an online only model because they're in a much more distributed situation so that students can sit exams anytime, anywhere. At present, they are in the process of making this shift. One of the countries that has launched a successful summative assessment initiative is the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, as mentioned. We'll discuss it in a bit, sorry. So these are, again, use case scenarios. I think the most important thing to highlight in this is that the digital computer center where the student sits the digital exam, as opposed to in the student's home, which is also possible for the WAS, it has computers that are running Windows 7 with 1 gigahertz processors. Hi, Mike, I'll be done in a second. And 2 gigabits of RAM, 64-bit RAM, 125 megabytes of free storage, and they are connected with 3 megabits per second internet connection, which is shared, I think, in this case, by 30 computers. I think that's actually reliable data. So what digital summative assessment does is enable rapid decision-making and response in relation to exams. Again, the first, in this example, in this slide, the emphasis is placed on procurement because you have to make sure the tools are appropriate and that they are integrated into each other. Again, it begins with use cases and it flows into procurement, integration, testing. Most importantly, I think the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia tested they ran a nationwide field test that turned out to be really important for increasing the confidence level of students. These are some digital summative assessment tools. As mentioned, Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, which is a bank-funded project, after conducting the review of software solutions, they opted to develop their own software, which included both the exam and it included online proctoring, which helped to eliminate cheating, a big concern for faculty. I think that's it. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Ed. Thank you so much. And we'd like to take questions and comments from people. We have Ed mentioned that the World Bank's support for the government in Saudi Arabia as they looked at large-scale online summative assessment. The bank has also been active in supporting the Egyptian government in large-scale summative assessment activities online. So we have increasing amounts of experience in this, but this is an area where we expect there to be increasing demand going forward, both at the summative stage and people recognizing the potential power of technology used for formative assessments. If we're happy to take questions from anyone, if you could put them in the chat or not. I wonder, I can kick off with a question, Ed, about what does it take to get started? You had this 3-stage process. What does it take, for example, what should a government be thinking about if it's thinking about doing large-scale summative assessment? You mentioned that some of the things that the Saudis did in preparation for as part of that development process. What are some things that need to be in place or thought of before a government undertakes such a journey?
Thanks, Mike. I think most importantly, and as exemplified by Saudi Arabia, is making sure that there is an adequate penetration of devices and of internet connectivity. Because especially in Saudi Arabia, I believe, and in many of the OECD countries, digital summative assessment is being sat by students in their homes. They're using devices that they have. They're using devices that they have and connectivity that is available to them. So I think that making sure those things are in place is extraordinarily important. Plus, getting exam software that is, the examination needs to be integrated with digital proctoring, needs to be integrated with digital identification so that you are sure that the right person is taking the test and they're taking the test without recourse to outside either internet connectivity or outside, people, if you will. One of the functions of summative assessment integrative software is software to be integrated with the APIs for summative assessment, I think, is internet lockdown, so that once they begin the exam, students are unable to use a browser window, for example, or use a connectivity which they need in order to complete the exam. They're unable to use that connectivity to also get answers to questions.
Right. Thanks, Ed. Yeah, and this topic of proctoring and dealing with cheating is a whole set of is a whole training session in and of itself. The bank was involved in Georgia as well. One of the things that they did when they did online summative assessment is they actually reduced the bandwidth to other parts of society so that the kids' connection to the testing servers would be protected. Can you talk a little bit about some of the prerequisites for formative assessment as well? Does this have to be done at a national level? Can it be done at a lower level or by teachers? And how do they choose? You mentioned a number of tools. Like how would a teacher know what tools she should use and why and how?
Most important, I think, is the understanding that digital formative assessment can be done regionally and locally. It can be done wherever you have the opportunity to work with the teacher, most important. But I think it relies on, in order to really reap the kinds of efficiency gains that you need to reap with digital formative assessment, I think you need to have prior development of curriculum-linked assessments. Those could be quizzes, they could be activities, as I said, they could be activities such as creation of portfolios. They could be activities such as inviting, the teacher can learn to invite the kids to create, to identify learning goals and identify their progress towards those goals. I think that the most important thing in relation to making digital formative assessment happen is making sure that the teacher has the knowledge to use the tool, use the assessment, and interpret the results of the assessment and respond to them. Those are all primarily the responsibility of teacher professional development. I think that there is, as I mentioned, there's a wide array of tools. The most popular ones seem to be used to make surveys and quizzes. Google Forms actually has a quiz feature, I believe, which is available for nothing and widely available for nothing. And so I think the tools are not the gating issue, making sure that in the school there is a device, there are devices for students and teachers, and that there is connectivity. In the case of some schools, it could just be a LAN, a Wi-Fi LAN, for example. That seems adequate to me.
So in some cases, you're saying that we don't need internet connectivity, although many of the tools are that we can actually do some of these things in offline environments, at least not connected to the internet.
Definitely. The kids need to have devices, the kids need to have devices that they can use to access the formative assessment assignment, but they don't need necessarily to access the internet to get those devices, to get the assessment and to complete the assessment.
Right. And you mentioned teachers, and we will be having a session in about half an hour looking at teacher skills and teacher skills to use technology, including to do things like participate and make use of formative assessment tools like you talked about. In the final minute, Ed, and a reminder that this is just a preview of a much larger, in-depth knowledge pack that Ed and the EdTech team have prepared or are preparing around this topic, and a preview of an upcoming, much more in-depth training session as well as part of the Bank Policy Academy. Ed, what are, if you were to highlight one or two bad practices or things that places get wrong or people get wrong when it comes to doing either summative assessment at a large scale or smaller scale formative assessment, what's a big don't do to leave people with?
In terms of a summative assessment, digital summative assessment, which in a way may be the most important thing in relation to remote distance education, I think one thing to do is to not test that your software is working, and to not create this sort of comfort that students need in order to, you want to make sure that the kids are able to take the assessment, to sit the exam without digital prejudice, if you know what I mean, so that they not only have a device and access, but so that they feel comfortable. As mentioned, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia staged a nationwide pilot exam. I think that's a very good practice. Not doing that is perhaps a recipe for failure.
Great, thanks, Ed. And that experience from, yes, hello.
Ali, may I just follow up with one brief question? Thanks so much. I saw the references to Ghana and Nigeria in your presentation. I hear about the hardware, I hear about the software, but one of the constraints we do have in our some of our countries, the capacity, both what's happening in the classroom or in a school, but also at the system level, via examination you mentioned in your presentation. Can you just a little bit talk about the capacity constraint in terms of the skills needed or systems needed to design and implement, not just the hardware, not the software, but also skills needed, the system level to implement this digital assessment, either assessment or examination?
Thank you very much, Aliel. Thank you for that question. I think that one of the issues with summative assessment is in relation to reliability and equity, that it's extraordinarily easy to design a summative assessment that is not a fair or reliable test of what the learner knows and who the learner is, and that you rely on this to allocate scarce resources, for example, the university placement or so on and so forth. And so the one capacity, I think, is simply the ability to design an effective summative assessment. In some cases, those assessments already exist, and they need to be transferred to digital modes using exam software and using the primarily digital skills, which may or may not exist within the Ministry of Education. And so I think that what you want are, first of all, you need integrative capacity. You need the ability to integrate the software tools, the proctoring tools, the digital ID tools, EMIS tools with the exam function itself. And that, I think, could be done in-house, could be done within the MOE, or it could be something where you want to have an outside consulting company take charge of that. But in any event, you need to test rigorously to make sure that there is digital equity, if you know what I mean, and to make sure that the integration of the various tools has proceeded in ways that leave you with a usable final product.
Thank you, Ed. And this is one topic among many that is explored in greater depth in the Knowledge Pack and in the related Policy Academy training. This institutional development is something we've seen also in Egypt and in Georgia and other places, the challenges of and how the bank can support testing institutions, ministries of education to do just this kind of thing are things that are being explored in the Knowledge Pack, in the Policy Academy, and by our assessments team, Marguerite and Julia and the team who are increasingly looking at digital applications as part of the bank's work in assessment. With that, I'd like to thank Ed, and we will maybe be hearing from him later as well, but I'd like to move on to the next item on our agenda and introduce you to Ari Mogos, who you may recognize from yesterday, those of us who are with us. Arim's going to talk about technology literacy apps. Arim, and I think she'll be joined by Esther Gacicio as well, but I think Arim will kick us off. Arim, are you with us this morning? And looking for you, and I will again appear just before the 10-minute mark.
Sounds good. I'm here. I'm just sharing my screen, and can everyone see?
We can, and we can hear you perfectly.
Okay, great. Thanks so much, Mike. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Looking forward to sharing a little bit about our work around literacy apps and the knowledge pack that we're producing. So to kick this off, I guess the most important question that we wanted to sort of address is really consider why literacy applications and why are we thinking about them or considering them as a viable ed tech solution. And this really ties back to learning poverty and the goal to ensure that all children can read by the age of 10. And so literacy applications can potentially be a solution which supports children who haven't achieved the minimum reading proficiency in school, and also support children who are out of school and unable to read. And so I'm going to provide a couple of examples. But before we go into that, it's important to just define what literacy applications are, or at least within this context of the knowledge pack, how we're defining it. So really, we're talking about a software and content solution that's really focused on the development of literacy that can support learners to acquire and strengthen their reading and writing skills. So this is very different from, say, TV or radio solutions that are leverage those technologies for literacy. That's separate. We're not looking at radio or television. We're really looking just at solutions that are designed for mobile. So just wanted to make sure that's clear. And these types of solutions really hone in on key literacy skills like phonics, reading comprehension, blending, vocabulary, and sentence building. And a couple of reasons of why we might consider literacy applications as a potential solution, and I just want to give a couple, are first, globally, literacy applications are really heavily designed for the primary education space, which intersects really nicely with the goals around learning poverty and the target age group. So it's something that is it's quite advantageous and something to really think about because there's a predominant focus on the preschool and kindergarten audience. And these literacy applications, they really target lower order literacy skills like alphabet knowledge and understanding upper and lowercase letters. So it's just a solution that's there that could help potentially close the gap. Another really key reason is that literacy apps have made reading materials and texts more available in indigenous and local languages. And we know how essential that is to literacy development. Children need materials in their mother tongue. So that's another really important reason to consider literacy applications. A couple of other reasons to think about them are some of the functionalities like text-to-speech and speech-to-text, which can support learners to improve their reading and writing. And then more general sort of features like tracking learning outcomes that can support teachers that have large classrooms and to help them sort of provide feedback back to their students. And then another sort of reason that I'll get into later in the presentation is just where the market is going and how literacy apps can be more cost effective in comparison to traditional print, and considering the drop in the cost of mobile devices and a couple other factors, it's really important to pay attention to just how things are really heading towards mobile, especially learning. So just something to really think about. So there are a couple of different types of literacy applications, and they're really two. And it's really important to understand the differences between the two. Generally on the market, you'll find literacy applications that are focused on core content. So those are applications which are aligned to the curriculum. So they are teacher-led, they establish the learning goals are established. There's a clear sequence of literacy concepts that are built on each other within the application, and there's indicators of progression, which support teachers to evaluate if their students are actually attaining core reading and writing competencies. So that's one type. The other type is, which is more of what you'll see on the market, is supplemental literacy applications. And these are very focused on content versus concept. They often don't have assessments or any type of evaluation component. And they're really focused on cultivating a culture of reading at home and a culture around lifelong reading. So it's important to make sure you're able to distinguish between the two when you're looking at a literacy application. And there are a couple of very common features that you'll find across literacy applications. So that includes highlight and read aloud functionality, story narration, word and sentence building, tracing letters and words. So those are kind of more specific to literacy itself. Those are very, very common features and functionalities. And then more specific to mobile applications, you'll see that, that they may have some adaptive learning features based on student data. They usually, many of them do work offline. There will be some data analytics components, and there may be some type of digital facilitator or mentor or character that will guide students through the literacy application. And literacy applications tend to come packaged in a couple of different ways. So these solutions can be packaged as an all-in-one hardware and software-based solution, which many of you may be familiar with. If you've heard of 1 Billion or Kit School, these are custom-made hardware and software solutions. Then there's a just a software-based solution itself. So that's what Feed the Monster is. It's device agnostic in the sense that it can work on smartphones, and it can also work on tablets. And then there are web-based solutions, which are more rare, and that is actually where more literacy application providers are heading. They're actually developing their solutions to be more web-based. So for example, Curious Learning, who's developed Feed the Monster, is actually in the process of developing their application to be web-based. And there's going to be more detail about this in the knowledge pack around what are the advantages and disadvantages of these three. And then there are different types of models of interventions. So, and these are just two, there's a couple more, but these are like two of the most sort of distinguishable ones. One is a sort of facilitator-led classroom-based model. And I just put in here, Can't Wait to Learn as an example. It's a self-paced game for out-of-school children. And this literacy application can actually be, it's self-paced and children can use it alone, but War Child Holland, who's developed the application, actually has a pretty robust facilitator model, and usually students will work in groups and there will be a facilitator. And during COVID, they had a rotation model, a 5 to 10 students per facilitator. This is a very different from, that model is a little bit different from KitKat School, which is self-paced at home. And there's no facilitator or educator or teacher that is crucial to the actual deployment. So the model here is 30 minutes of independent learning every day for 3 to 5 months. And so KitKat School has different types of interventions, some that have been 3 months, some that have been 6 months, some that have been 15 months, but it's all of them have been about 30 minutes of independent learning every day without a facilitator. So these are sort of two of the key models to take a look at, and that this will also be reflected in the knowledge pack. So some of the challenges with literacy applications that I just wanted to briefly cover. And they kind of fall under 2 buckets. The first is really the design of literacy applications. Many of them tend to be steeped in a Western context, so US, Europe, and for the context that we're working in, they really lack culturally relevant content. So linguistically and then just culturally not representative. Many of them are not available in languages that we're looking for. And one example, Feed the Monster has done a really great work around actually localizing their application. And I think right now it's available in almost 50 languages. And they've also created a localization guide to actually support other organizations creating literacy applications to understand the process and what it takes to actually localize their app. Which is really helpful. And then another piece is really there's limits in the pedagogical design of literacy applications and teacher PD and just materials for teaching in general. So there tends to be a sort of heavy gamification and also not a lot of, in terms of the scaffolding, sometimes literacy applications can actually demotivate students. So that's something to take note of. And then the other challenge around literacy applications is procurement. So there are thousands of literacy applications on the Google Play Store, the Apple Store, other app stores in different contexts. And filtering through those apps can be really overwhelming because you're not able to even filter through the App Store with the criteria that you need. For example, knowing that it's aligned to the curricula and a couple of other factors. So that's a really big challenge. And then another challenge is a resistance from the publishing industry, which has actually resulted in, as part of the reason there's some scarcity around, B2G literacy applications, meaning that there's a dearth of literacy applications that are aligned to the curricula, because for the publishing industry, in many markets, the print-based books are really their bread and butter, and they're not making money with literacy applications or ebooks. And so there's a huge resistance there, which is kind of preventing that ecosystem from flourishing. So these are just some of the important challenges to make note of. So just kind of building on that, where exactly is the market going? So the EdTech market globally and across the continent is growing. I mentioned this earlier, mobile phones are transforming in terms of capability. There's new operating systems like iOS that are extremely affordable, and the ability of this operating system, for example, to function like a smartphone or aspects of a smartphone, but kind of maintain the cost of a feature phone, is making literacy applications, for example, will be much more accessible on these types of devices. So knowing that this is where the market is headed, there's also been a proliferation of digital content providers across the continent. There's a very rich ecosystem in East Africa, for example, of digital content providers who are, selling their content, for example, directly to schools. So the private sector is really capitalizing on this. And it's really important to consider how the role that the World Bank takes in supporting this ecosystem.
Thanks, Armin. Armin, we are you're a bit over time, 13. I just want to give chance for people to jump in with questions. And I know that in some of the questions, some of the common questions that people may ask may be things that you address in the presentation shortly, but I wanted to jump in and give people an opportunity to ask questions now. If not, I think one of the questions that lots of people will have are about the enabling, what you need to have, what are the enabling factors to use literacy apps, whether in a school or across the system. If no one else wants to jump on the question, maybe that's a segue into the next part of your presentation.
Okay, I will take just 1 minute to quickly wrap this up. So digital infrastructure is a big piece of the enabling factors. So I mentioned earlier that many literacy apps do work offline, but some of them don't. So thinking about the internet penetration rate, thinking about devices is really important. So earlier I sort of outlined the kind of model of different literacy applications. Some of them are very device dependent, and those devices can be very costly. Some of those device and software packages are $50 to $100 per package, which is really not affordable. So that's really important to think about. Thinking about the cost of data. So literacy apps are, they have video, they have images, they have audio. Some of them do, some of them don't. So thinking about data, and then also thinking about digital skills that teachers, students, and especially caregivers would need around how to engage in a mobile literacy intervention fully is really important.
Thanks, Ariam. And I'm going to jump in. A question from our colleague Eunice. I'm assuming Eunice in Ghana has asked about World Reader, an organization that many TTLs are familiar with. But she asks, as World Reader, as an organization, played a role in providing literacy using digital means? And that is one name that might be familiar to some staff, but they don't actually know what it is or what it does.
Yes. So I'll just actually flip to sort of a sample list of literacy applications. World Reader is a proprietary application that is more focused on supplemental content, although they're also working on some core content. And they have worked in Ghana, Kenya, South Africa, and I believe they're working in other countries. And they have a very robust tool that now is web-based, which makes it extremely accessible. Their application is called BookSmart. So they have a couple of different applications to take a look at. But I think what's great about them and what's quite unique is that they do have a web-based application, which makes it much more accessible. So it's not device dependent. So it can be accessed, for example, on a smart feature phone.
Thanks, Ariam. And we also have a question about, people think about literacy apps as something to help kids learn how to read, but how about apps or tools for teachers or maybe caregivers or other people to help students develop literacy skills?
Yeah, so there are literacy applications to support teachers. I mean, that's something we have to expand on in the knowledge pack. There is actually a bit of a gap in literacy. So for example, there are literacy applications which support reading at home, but there's quite a big gap around supporting caregivers with the skills that they need to actually use the app with their children. So the apps are there, but in terms of the training and support, there are big gaps.
Thanks, Ariam. And what are some key questions maybe to consider if you're thinking about introducing a literacy app, whether related to pedagogical goals or age? What are some key questions to consider?
Oh, that's great, because I did not get to that. So a couple of the questions to really think about are starting off with, like, what are the educational objectives and needs based on the target audience? What are the grade levels that your intervention is targeting? And then what are the core pedagogical goals around literacy for those specific grade levels? Those are really the really key questions to start off with if you're designing a literacy intervention, if you want to use a mobile literacy application.
Awesome, thanks. And a reminder that these topics are explored in much greater detail in the related knowledge pack and will be explored in the Policy Academy as well. And maybe, Aram, if you could leave us with some, walk through some of the steps that people should consider, and who is considering this? Is this a teacher? Is this a Ministry of Education official? Is this a school head? Who is sort of involved in making the decisions often? Is it a parent?
So I think all of those stakeholders are making decisions in different stages of an intervention. I think what's outlined here is really the ministry, or I would say ministry, or a head teacher or principal, really thinking about the grade or school level, and thinking about the needs of those learners, the skills that those learners need to acquire according to the grade level. So that's what's often missing in literacy applications. They're not aligned. The skills that need to be acquired and the grade level are often not aligned. And then the pedagogical tasks or goals that the learners need to actually acquire are not aligned to the grade level. So all of these pieces, step 1, step 2, step 3, have to be aligned for a literacy app to be effective. That's really important. And then once you get to step 3, you can start sourcing and evaluating literacy applications. These are the criteria that you really need to use. And here is just kind of an example that lays out, if you're targeting an emergent reader, for example, these are some of the goals that you need to target. These are some of the goals, right? Like letter naming, decoding. And then what would be the sequence of concepts that if you're evaluating a literacy app, what would be the sequence of concepts you need to see to make sure that a learner is able to decode, for example. And then in the right column, you'll see there's a couple of examples of literacy apps that do that.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Aryam, and thank you to Ed and Esther who helped you with this knowledge pack and are working on this. Reminder that this work also is a digital, looking at sort of the digital lens on work that some of our colleagues are doing, for example, who work on curriculum and who work on early childhood education and early childhood development. Thanks so much, Aryam. And you mentioned the last bit about teachers and the question we had about teachers. We'd now like to move to a discussion around teacher skills. How can teachers use technology to teach? How can they use it to teach themselves? What type of skills do they need? And how should we think about helping them develop them? This will be the topic that Barbara Freeman will be talking about right now. Over to you, Barbara.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Are you able to hear me and see my screen?
We can hear you well and see your screen well as well.
Okay, well, it's nice to be here with you. I am talking about skills and teacher skills frameworks today, and with a particular focus on remote and blended learning. So in my experience, the question that is most asked is, how do we train teachers to use a specific technology? It is indeed a very good question. So when people pose this question, what are they really asking, right? We have this idea that technology could be used to improve teaching and learning. Not really a new idea. Some people fall in love with technologies, others resist it. But ultimately, the reason that whatever digital technology tool is being implemented is to help students learn more, to engage more, to be more interested, and so forth. So it's always important to bear in mind that the overall goal of any technology and education question is really how to improve the quality of student learning outcomes. And I find it helpful to often bring it back to that issue, right? Everything ties back to, can we improve student learning? So as we know and hope very strongly, technology does empower teachers. I find it useful to think about teachers in two different roles. That's teachers as teachers. That's the role that we often think about, right? The teacher is teaching in a classroom, working with her students, instilling knowledge into their students, teachers as teachers. But there's also the role of teachers as learners. Now, teachers as learners need to be learners in terms of learning this new technology tool, for example. But as we start to unravel the possibilities of digital technologies, and particularly of empowering teachers in their roles, teachers as learners and continuous learners become more critical than ever. So, a few things. As learners, teachers need to learn how to technically use different tools. Many tools, as we've been talking about, are extremely powerful and useful, but you've got to know that they exist, know how to use them. And there is a particularly steep learning curve in some of these tools if you don't have the underlying digital literacy to use digital technology. And part of that, because again, the tools have become increasingly easy to use, intuitive, and so forth. So allied to that thought is this willingness to engage with technology, right? The attitude and mindset you bring. And then there's the role of teachers as teachers, right? Teachers need to integrate digital tools into their daily practice to communicate, to collaborate, and that's to communicate with students, to communicate with their colleagues, to communicate with caregivers, and to collaborate with those entities as well, and to engage. And especially in a remote environment where there really is no choice or little choice. So the follow-up question to this is, what are the skills that teachers need in this environment, and where to start? It's best to think about, when you're thinking in a remote environment, it's best to think about two buckets of skills: digital skills and digital pedagogical skills. And in the remote and blended kind of setting, it's not pedagogical skills, it's always digital informed. Whether it's lower resource or higher resource, it's digital pedagogical skills. So let's take these two, starting with digital skills. You could also think of it as technology or digital literacy. These are skills that are needed to use and interact with data, information, communication, and networking tools, for example. They could range from basic skills such as using a tablet, accessing a web page, downloading a program, or using calendar and mail features, to hosting a Zoom or a WebEx meeting and creating video libraries and broadcasting a video demonstration of a lesson. So that's the basic digital skills in order to access and manage and create knowledge, and to do so responsibly, ethically, and of course effectively and competently. Now, the next piece of this, which is obviously, you can see in the picture, overlaps and completely related, is the digital pedagogical skill. And this is the ability to teach using technology. So in this case, the idea behind it is to motivate, interest, and engage students. For example, creating an engaging learning experience, personalizing and scaffolding the learning using technology. I want to just point to something Ed said earlier when we were talking about formative assessment. When you're thinking digital pedagogical, the first thing is knowing, right, that the formative assessment is important and how it helps you. And then, knowing that you need it, and then knowing the best way to implement it, the best tools in your setting. Also, teachers need to be innovative, collaborative, and collaborate with other teachers, create connections, and persist. And that's why 21st century and socio-emotional skills are really integral to digital pedagogical practices in a remote context. In the knowledge pack, we talk about various specific instructional strategies that can be used in high and low and different kinds of resource contexts, so we can get deeper into this. What we don't want to see is good instructional practice used by some teachers some of the time in some places. So this takes us back to the first question of how do we bring teaching and learning to scale, and the two roles of teachers. right? So teacher is teacher, teacher is learner. To avoid the pitfall, right, of a few good teachers doing a few good things, it's helpful to use a skills framework. And I have up on the screen here one example of a good skills framework. It's DigComp EDU, and it helps to develop teachers' digital and pedagogical skills. And what you could see on the left in orange is the professional engagement. This is the teachers as learning portion of it. So for example, teachers' ability to reflect on their practice, to work with their colleagues. In the center, by far the largest center of this framework, is the teachers' pedagogic competencies. And this is teachers as teachers. So teachers' ability to select resources like the OER we were discussing the other day, and to create and modify them at higher levels of understanding. There's also the basic teaching and learning, guiding students, facilitating and activating learning, empowering learners that finds inclusion strategies for all students, and the assessment that we talked about earlier. And the third part of this equation is actually the learner themselves. And it's equally important to engage the learner in this. Students too need to have some level of digital literacy. For example, they need to know how to use a tablet to facilitate, to use the materials. And the teachers, part of their role is also to facilitate the learner's skills development and competency in digital. I talked about DigComp EDU on the last slide. It is a superb framework, but it's not the only framework that teaches digital and pedagogical skills. Pro Futuro, UNESCO are also excellent examples, and they take a different way of looking at this. If your objective, on the other hand, is really to dig down and to improve teachers' foundational teaching skills, then you may wish to work with the World Bank's Teaching Coach. Again, in the knowledge pack, we provide a full analysis of all the different frameworks with links and checklists, attributes, and comparisons between these frameworks. So ultimately, what it comes down to, whether brick and mortar or virtual, is the foundational teaching, right? And the instructional core, as we call it, which is really the relationship, the instructional practices of the teacher, and the relationship of the student to the teacher and the content, and the rigor and challenge of the content itself, in whichever environment you're sitting in. Right? It's important the task that the student is doing. What are they working on? What's in front of them? But as we know, this looks very different in a remote environment. And of course, it's harder because you're not getting the regular face-to-face cues on this. And so what needs or could happen in this is that teachers need to be more facilitators and activators of learning. Students need to be more active in their own learning, and so forth. So as you know, it's generally good advice not to waste a crisis. So this crisis, pandemic, has caused a shift to remote learning, as schools globally have been forced to shut down. So in that force, teachers and schools are getting more comfortable with technologies, and an opportunity has opened up to use these technologies and to make classrooms more learner-centered and active. And the more active and engaged students are in their own learning, the better chance that they actually will learn. So we return now to the initial question: how do we train teachers on digital technologies? Difficult as it is, training teachers on technologies is a technical problem. We know how to do it. And actually, we've got more on this in the learning packet itself. The final thing, though, that we come to is the most pivotal dimension in bringing about implementing a good teacher program and implementing change, and that's the human factor. In a sense, this is a classic adaptive challenge. And adaptive challenges require you to work with people, in this case, teachers, and not impose something on teachers. So we need to engage the teacher as a partner in the adaptive problem solving. As we talked about earlier, the importance and significance of digital technologies has been amplified because of the pandemic, and most are motivated and are starting to see this value. So the moment is right for training and for change. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And a reminder to everyone, this is a preview of a knowledge pack on this topic and of a larger, more in-depth training session. And of course, this is a topic, digital skills for teachers, that our teachers team is working on a lot as well. Barbara, if we might start with a question about some examples. Can you give some examples of countries that are implementing these types of trainings and mapping skills to what they think are the teacher needs, especially related to digital skills?
Yeah, that's a great question, Mike. And actually, I'd love to. There's many examples, and I've got on the screen here just a few of these examples, and I'm just going to talk through a couple to answer your question. Yes, it can be done is sort of the answer. And in Nigeria, teacher training at a low scale has been done in the state of Edo. Over 11,000 primary school teachers were trained. And what's interesting to use tablets and smartphones and other digital technologies. And during the pandemic, they were actually able to shift to in-person and remote learning and training. So it was just a beautiful transition. In Kenya, and this is important, the Ministry of Education and the Teachers Service Commission really rapidly responded to the pandemic. And they wrote a very wonderful and comprehensive manual that addresses digital skills and pedagogical skills. And the whole idea when they brought the manual out was the possibility of learning loss, right? And so they designed this manual to teach and guide. But what they're learning as they developed it and as they are implementing the digital and pedagogical skills is that they can also have found an opportunity to both improve teaching and learning and also find ways to address teacher shortages. And then finally, I'll just skip through to maybe Vietnam. And this training challenge was a little different because what they wanted to do is improve the quality of teaching across the network of teacher training universities, so across the country. And when they started to think about that, they realized the original thought was we need training in digital skills. But what they really realized is that wasn't enough. They felt it was really important to enhance the socio-emotional skills of not only their students and the students' motivation, but also their teachers. And so built into that program now are creativity and different kinds of socio-emotional skills related to self-management and so forth.
Awesome, thanks. And please feel free to post your questions in the chat. I have another question, and I know it's in the knowledge pack, but a question about, okay, all this sounds good, developing teacher skills, but also how relevant is this in rural areas? What are the tools that can be used for teachers in rural areas? Is it possible to help teachers develop digital skills in those contexts? Is it possible to help them develop these skills so they themselves can learn with technology?
Yes, absolutely. But let's just say it is harder, right? And the important part again on this is coming back to the point of pedagogy again, knowing what to do, making sure that those fundamentals are still correct. So in other words, making sure that that instructions are provided really clearly, right? Making sure that there's a release, that there's a guide to help people provide answers. So that there's the low stake assessments to check for understanding. So that it's making sure that you've got some of those fundamentals in place. But in addition to that, and probably most important, is keeping kids connected to learning in some ways. We don't want them to drop out. And that means in keeping kids connected, the primary source of relationship could be WhatsApp or a basic phone. But the important thing is that there's communication with the student and the teacher. So you do regular checkups, right? There are also ways, obviously, we talked earlier about devices and tablets and downloading information into the tablet. So that's, and we talked a little bit, which is a fantastic strategy because you don't need to be connected to internet. But take it a step further, it is possible to take materials that are printed and have a place where those materials are, and you can collect them, look at them, provide feedback, hand them back, and they can be collected. So there are ways, right, to connect people into that technology. They then do that work and you get on the phone.
Excellent. Thanks, Barbara. We have another question about, you laid out a whole set of skills, lots of different skills. Teaching is a complicated endeavor, even if teachers are not paid as if it were in most cases. Can you talk about what are the basic minimum skills that teachers need to qualify to participate in digital training? Like, what are where do they need to start, and what are the minimum that need to be that teachers need to develop?
Yeah, I think when we're talking about digital, I think that the very first place that we really want to start is the ability to use information, to be able to gather it, to use media, and as I was just talking about a moment ago, to be able to communicate and connect. So I think that the basic thing is being able to access and manage information at the most basic level. That would be ultimately the most important thing. And when you look at any of these skills frameworks, they actually all have learning progressions. So in other words, the place to start is being able to responsibly access, right, and to manipulate data and to manage it. But as we move up the learning curve, if you'd like, we start to think about integration and then evaluation and creation and all those kind of nice things. But that's where I would start.
Thanks, Barbara, and keep the questions coming, and feel free again if you just want to text them to me, as some people have done. That's okay too. What are some things that education systems get wrong when thinking about the types of digital skills that teachers need to develop? Are there classic mistakes or common mistakes, or is there a mistake that you want to really highlight that if you do this, you may well have problems?
Yeah, the human factor. So I just put the slide up. That's the biggest thing. You've got to engage the teacher, right? So if you're going to change the way that a teacher teaches, right? And it's not about the technology, and we know that, right? But being asked that, and everything really, there's a word on there, is about relevance, right? Ensuring that it's relevant. So I would say if there's one thing, excluding the teacher from the process of being a learner and empowering them to teach is probably the biggest pitfall that you could see. So I would. There are many technical things that come under that, but I would say the human factor, and of course that's one of the more difficult ones.
Thanks, Barbara. And then as we wrap up here, and I note that Maria has put a link to a brief that the bank's EdTech team has prepared on technology for teaching. Just lastly, maybe if you could, let's say you are Ministry of Education and you say, yes, we want to develop digital skills for teachers. What are some things that they should think about then, as sort of a checklist of things that they might want to consider? Just briefly, the key attributes they should look for in the various different frameworks or tools that are out there.
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing is to, again, the ask why, and to know why you're doing it and what is the focus and the objective of whatever whatever you're doing. So in other words, are you trying to develop professional development? The other important starting piece in the checklist is identifying the gaps. So knowing what you're teaching to and where those gaps are. So in addition, what I didn't show, and it's also in the knowledge pack, is a whole sense of assessments. So you can do all different types of assessments. So one, for example, are rapid digital assessments to understand the gaps and the gaps in the change, you know, what's different in different parts of the country or in regions or so forth. I'd suggest, you know, a whole bunch of wonderful tools sit there that also align, if you're going to use a framework, that can align to frameworks. So there's tools like Selfie and that aligns to DigComp, and CIEB that aligns to ProFuturo, and other types of tests that can actually highlight the skills.
Thanks so much, Barbara. And those types of skills, the tools and the mapping of them, the frameworks, are things that are explored in more detail in the knowledge pack and will be explored more in the training. ECWA has noted that it said it would be interesting to see examples of countries that have done well in this regard, starting at the pre-service level. Usually most teachers were trained in a pre-digital era in where we work, and you know how you can build this in at the pre-service level. This is something that is also explored in the knowledge pack and in the future training. Thank you so much, Barbara. And now we'd like to move on to the final presentation of the day, which isn't a preview of a knowledge pack. It's a preview of highlights of messages from things that sit in between, if you will. And our colleague, Cristobal Cobo, who worked on this with Iñaki Sanchez, is going to talk to us about remedial learning and tutoring with a focus on low resource settings. How can technology be relevant to this? Over to you, Cristobal.
Thank you, Mike, and to the team for organizing this, and to everybody to be here till the last session has been a long marathon. If you're feeling a little bit of WebEx fatigue, you are welcome to download this audio presentation and watch it later on. But for those of you who would like to stay, I would like to start saying that today it's very hard to know exactly what is the size of the learning loss at the global level, but we start having already some evidence of countries which are very worrying. Let me share two. For instance, in Kenya, we know, particularly in the rural Kenya, the learning loss is equivalent to 3.5 months of the whole academic year. Or in Ethiopia, for instance, the learning loss today is equivalent of only learning 30 or 40% of what is expected to be learned in a normal year. So that scenario is really driving countries to design a whole sort of remedial learning strategies and policies, and I will highlight some of them at a very high level. So the first thing to say is, when we have been asking countries who is taking that decision and how is the planning being organized, in some cases, that decision is driven by the central administration, the Ministry of Education. While in other countries, we are observing that is much more designed at the grassroots level, at the district level, or even at the school level. So based on what are the evidence to design the remote learning actions, in some cases are policies quickly implemented to address or mitigate the problems of the learning loss that I mentioned a minute ago, or also the risk of dropout. In other cases, the actions are being driven by the result of rapid formative or summative assessment, and in order to accommodate or mitigate some of these risks. Now, if I have to organize quickly or structure the main actions implemented today as a remedial learning, I think they can be organized in four big buckets. The first one is compress the content, summarize the most relevant content from the curriculum, and focalize the energy on teaching those subjects. The second one is extending the learning time, either through summer classes, having a longer schedule, or even teaching on the weekends is something that many countries are implementing. The third element has to do with higher levels of flexibility. Many of us have learned about how countries are implementing or exploring with hybrid or blended learning approaches, reducing the classroom size and having some of the students in the school. And the fourth pillar, which is the one I'm gonna drill down a little bit more, is the idea of tutoring. So recruiting more teachers, having a lower ratio student teachers, and facilitating other opportunities for having more and better learning experience. So let me tell you a little bit about the tutoring and why we think it's important today in the conversations that are happening today. In affluent countries like in the UK, they have been allocating an important amount of resources just for facilitating remote tutoring, particularly focused on the most vulnerable students, up to 15 hours for those for those learners, and they are targeting specific subjects such as math or English. And why they do that? Because they have previous evidence that a course on high quality tutoring has proven to boost the performance between 3 to 5 months. And now the announcement that was yesterday, by the way, is that they will offer 100 million hours of free tuition to help them, the students, to catch up with the learning. So this is something that is happening today in different countries. So roughly to understand what is a tutoring, what is the difference between some kind of tutoring, we have human tutoring, which is a teacher or a coach offering a live one-to-one or one-to-few learning experience. We have other platforms that are offering today connection with peers or with students who already passed that subject, which is called near-peer tutoring. And the third is pre-recorded tutoring, in which can be used by one-to-many. Probably many of you are familiar with the Khan Academy. Now we have non-human tutoring. In some cases, those are based on prescriptive lessons, so contents are already in the platform, or adaptive, depending whether they integrate some level of artificial intelligence. Now, most of the human tutoring services, they are based on a subscription or a fee, while the non-human ones, they tend to be free or premium, meaning that you will have access to some of these resources. So to give you a rough estimation, in the US, for instance, you will find that the cost of some of these tutoring platforms can vary between $30 to $10 per week. Others might be slightly cheaper, $15 per week in a month, but you have access anytime that you might require an expert to help you with a homework, to help you with an assignment. Or in countries like Korea, where the cost is much higher, and it will depend on the expertise and the academic degrees of the tutoring. Now, 2020 has been a year unlike many others. And in the tech sector, according to Holland IQ, many of the unicorn companies, that those which have received more than $1 billion, are in the sector of tutoring. From the 7 ones that you see in the screen, 4 of them are on tutoring with gigantic valuations, particularly in China and in India. Let me give you an example. One interesting example is Yuan Fudao. Hopefully I pronounce it well, which offer tutoring and the support for homeworks. And part of the fee that the company receives is allocated to the teacher who is providing this service. So they offer a really comprehensive offer for primary and secondary students in subjects like English and math. And they also offered all these services of personalized exercise tests, and offer the teachers and parents to monitor and track what is the learning progress of the student, integrating some level of AI. So they have 400 million users, and of those 1.5 are students who are paying a regular fee, and you can see in the image how they have been skyrocketing. Why the interest on the tutoring? Well, because we know, based on evidence done, for instance, by Jay Pal and the University of Chicago, that a good tutoring assigned randomly to students, it can be offer a learning equivalent to 2.5 years worth of math in one academic year. That's why today we see an explosion of offers of different forms of tutoring, one-to-many, for instance. You will find several catalogs on the internet offering these kind of services, but also there are some services of human-based tutoring, particularly for college students, in which they can receive assistance on science, math, but also some kind of company or social emotional support when required. And interestingly, when we were preparing this presentation with Iñaki, we found that there's some of the platforms that are used to train people to become coach, which really shows you how booming is this market in terms of the interest that it's gaining. Let me give you some examples of India, which I think are interesting. Byju, for instance, is a really large platform with over 60 million users, offer video lessons and adaptive contents for classes, but particularly focus on high-stake exams. So depending on the amount of contents that you will access, you might need to pay up to $28. The other platform that is called Bendatu. It's a platform that has been exploiting the last couple of months, growing systematically, and they offer contents between 1st and 12th grade. And this is a much more online tutoring with live classes and with a lot of resources and content. And the third one, which is slightly different, is called Brainly. They say that they offer the largest study group in the world, 150 million users. And the idea here in this case is the students help other students to prepare the exams, to do the homeworks, to do assignments together. really, really large sector today in India, a lot of interest. Now, we have other kind of different approach, which are the so-called chatbots, which are these pre-programmed assistants for doing some kind of interactions. In the National University in California, for instance, I recently released a study in which they show that the faculty and the staff, they have saved 500 hours per month, boosting 70% the student retention because they have this extra help on the bots, or even Teach for All. They are integrating these days these little chatbots that offer some kind of rehearsal and practice like you will find in Duolingo as an assistant that can be used and integrated in platforms such as WhatsApp. So let me wrap up some of the things that we have mentioned so far. The first one is the actions to implement remedial learning has been driven by different factors, in some cases quickly reacting in order to mitigate the learning loss or minimize as much as possible the students' dropout. In other cases, this has been driven after evidence from formative and summative assessment. The second one is the actions addressed by many countries. They can be organized in maximizing the time, recruiting more teachers, prioritizing some subjects, and also focusing on the most vulnerable students. Now, we have said some things about the tutoring, and I think the increasing level on tutoring is due, there already some consistent evidence that this has been proved to be effective in the years before the pandemic. And now, obviously, there is a change of scalability. The prices that I mentioned earlier are not necessarily applicable for all the countries, but at the same time, there are other options, self-paced, peer-based, highly adaptable, which are options that be considered. And I do believe that we have to have a close look on these solutions because they really can offer an extended opportunity from the formal learning to these other venues of remedial learning. There are plenty of discussions to take yet on how to integrate face-to-face, remote, synchronous, asynchronous, how to provide high-quality tutoring, and how to obviously address the digital divide that leaves many learners outside of these opportunities. Back to you.
Thank you so much, Cristobal. And thank you everyone for your questions and comments. John mentions, talks about just the use of technology to engage parents is very interesting. Cristobal, one question I think we have with all these is, are there any other examples that you can share, international examples of either technology used to support remote learning or remedial learning, or perhaps tutoring? Are there some other notable things that we should be aware of?
So I think this is a market that is not new. What is new today is the excitement. I mean, probably one of the most famous is Duolingo, which is some kind of tutoring with some level of assistance. The question we have as a team is, which of these solutions can be offered with limited connectivity? And I think we have observed low-tech solutions, meaning the technology is the commodity, the real value is in the interaction between the student and learner. So WhatsApp can become an online or remote tutoring service if you have a well-planned strategy of regular interactions and follow-up. So I will restrain from suggesting one platform in particular. The ones that I mentioned, I think, are today champions in the market because they're growing a lot. But with this more simple technology, even a feature phone can be used for offering some kind of tutoring.
Awesome, thanks. And are there any other country examples, just what maybe national ministries of education are doing to use technology to help support remedial learning? Sure.
So one example that we think is very interesting is the one implemented in Brazil. In Brazil, they did a partnership with the Centro de Medias in the Amazon. So they offer content through television. But immediately after the content is being streamed, the government offered an app in which the students and the teachers can interact 1 hour or 2 hours discussing the contents of the television. And in this case, it's interesting because this is the connectivity subsidized by the government. So here you have the best of both worlds. You have the one-way interaction, but at the same time, you have the bi-directional opportunity of teachers and students to unpack the discussion and having a much more granular conversation.
Awesome, thanks, Cristobal. And while there won't be a specific knowledge pack on this, where can people learn or turn to learn more about the use of technology to support remedial learning, to support or enable tutoring? Where can they go for more information, and who should they talk to?
Absolutely. So we are about to release a study which was conducted for the last 14 months in 18 countries to understand what have been the remedial learning actions done by different countries. We have been discussing with policymakers, with academic, with practitioners, and we will release that very soon. And I think that will offer a huge diversity of options, some of them top-down, some of them bottom-up, and in many cases, a combination of those, which I hope will be of help for our TTLs.
All right. Thanks so much, Cristobal. So look forward to that, everyone, and look forward to the various knowledge packs and upcoming Policy Academy. I'll also note that we'll have a dedicated webinar and training on EdTech procurement, as well as other topics, but that is one that we know is of special interest to lots of people, and that people would like to go into more depth. We will go into more depth on all these topics in the upcoming Policy Academy, and we will be circulating all of these presentations and items from the chat, as well as links to the videos very shortly, maybe even today. And so thank you so much for all of your attention, your participation. We still have almost 50 people with us. I'd like to now turn and thank, well, maybe Hello will give the thanks, but over to you, Hello, for some concluding thoughts and thinking about a way forward.
Thanks so much, Mike. Thanks, Chris. This has been very rich presentation. I learned a lot. So this, I think the EdTech area is growing important in the region. Obviously, I'm very pleased to see successful, good examples from our countries. We can do more. We will be doing more. I'm also happy to hear actually there will be a webinar on procurement. I think the presentations gave kind of many of options. We have a lot. The TTLs, obviously, they know what's happening in their own countries, but there are a lot also what's happening in other countries and also globally. So a lot to learn. But at the end, actually, our TTLs on the ground, they know the country context, sector context, what's happening, what can be brought in. On the design, on the procurement, implementation, I think Mike was referring to enabling environment in a country context, really what it can work, what it cannot. Often the financing may not be an issue if we have a project engagement, but the design and implementation of cost-effective options. I don't know what they could be. I gave you example yesterday. Sometimes we have an easy solution. Why don't we give a tablet to every single student or a teacher, and then we solve the learning poverty crisis in the region? But maybe that may not be an option. So I think today's discussion and yesterday, we have really the use of technology in education in different areas a lot. What I would really, I will follow up with EdTech team also with our my fellow PMs, what we can do more in the region. The maybe follow-up webinars, follow-up discussions in different areas, and then also learn more successful examples in that, because our TTRs at the end, they engage the countries, the ministries of education. We bring good ideas, but at the end, this is the country-led the programs, the projects or interventions we do have. They will be implementing, we will be helping them. So it has been really rich discussion. I learned a lot. We will be following up next few months more. I want to thank each of you for excellent presentation, and then we will get back to you next few months again for your support. I want to thank again everyone. Mike, Alex, if you have any other announcement, please do.
Thank you. Hello. Thank you also to Lorelei and Rocky, to Patrick and Elif, to helping make all of this happen. Alex, for being the conductor behind the scenes for all of this and leading us through the process. Alex, do you want to give us the last word and wish us a good day?
Yes. No, Halil, I really want to extend a sincere thanks to you and also to Jaime. You know, when we started discussing the need for this training, a couple of months ago, we did the digital skills one, and we've done this. We have one more on the procurement, which should be very interesting. we are planning to co-organize this with our procurement colleagues. We have the park actually being reviewed by them, and we'll do a joint presentation or training on procurement, which I think is very important. Also, I should note that Halil and the management, the PMs have asked us to look at the region-specific EdTech strategy. So it is also something that we will be working with EdTech team and a number of colleagues in the region to put this together. And so we will stay tuned. That will also be coming soon. And with that, really, just to say again, thank you so much. It's amazing to see the participation. That means this is important. We're available to help. Integrate a lot of the things we discussed into projects. We are available to help design and supervise and implement those projects. So again, a sincere thanks from us. And over to you, Halil, for the final word.
Thanks so much. Two final kind of follow-up actions. One is thanks again for your participation in the digital skills training workshop we had last month, I guess, or in April, by Sajid and her team. Again, it went very well. We had great interest. The demand, actually, this type of the knowledge by our teams, TTLs, across the region. So I've asked Sajid and her team to also come back on the costing of the digital skills, the packages, I guess. So she will come back to, I don't know the date yet, but next few weeks to have a follow-up session today. I encourage you also attend this training. It will be more operational, really help you to go through this step by step how to design digital skills package intervention in your programs, projects, or engagement in the countries you have been working. The second thing, next week, again, Africa Education Management Team in collaboration with IEG, this is the bank's independent evaluation group, we will have a session, actually, we will be inviting them to come back to us to discuss really how the bank projects have been doing, what IEG does, and how our projects have been recently being implemented, the feedback we have been receiving. It will be interesting because we will see some of the interventions under this digital skills, digital technology. We will see in 5, 6, 7 years' time how successful we have been, actually. So the one question I'm sure the EdTech team will be asking on the cost-effective intervention, what it works, what it doesn't work. What's the status of the monitoring evaluation? We have a lot of great ideas, but sometimes maybe not applicable depending on the country. So it will be interesting, actually, next week. I also encourage you to attend. This is One Africa Education Team. The Amit and Dina are likely also to join us. So we want to learn also our engagement and then how our projects have been doing. So that's the second announcement, actually, I have today. Again, I want to thank each of you, the presenters. It's excellent. Please do reach out to them, our TTLs. And I want to thank you for your participation and interest, and then have a great day and see you soon again. Thanks.